Hello and welcome to episode number 10. We're in the double digits, so it's starting to look like something. I'm slowly moving away a little bit more and more from the initial vlog, which was about domestic abuse, and slowly drifting into unfamiliar territory, or at least uncharted territory for me in terms of blogs or vlogs, but not necessarily unfamiliar or unfamiliar terrain for me. So this time I want to dive into identity politics and how I see it's connected to a lack of uniqueness, which is not inherent by any means, and why this is problematic. So first off, introduction. So identity politics is going through its heydays and is increasingly endangering people's singular, unique identities. Because you are no longer you, but a set of categories in which you fit, and it comes with expectations, privileges, and guilt. And this is not necessarily equally divided. Some categories come with privileges, and others come with guilt. And I'm not going to dive into which ones come with guilt, which one come with privileges. Just think for yourself. You're a smart person, I assume. And so identity politics is exactly that, and I quote from Wikipedia, a political approach in which people of a particular race, religion, gender, social background, social class, environmental, or other identifying factors develop political agendas that are based upon these identities. Well, what's more, many contemporary advocates of identity politics take a so-called intersectional perspective, which accounts for the range of interacting systems of oppressions that may affect their lives and come from their various identities. So intersectionality can mean that you're not only part of a particular race, of course you're also part of a particular gender, and then this particular category has specific needs that are usually the premise is that those needs are ignored or not addressed by a larger group, and they need to be addressed. With intersectionality, you get like subdivisions of subdivisions of subdivisions. But let's look first, where does identity politics come from? And I think there's an important distinction that needs to be made between more modern identity politics and identity politics that has been attempted and failed by mostly native populations in, for instance, colonies as the United States, Australia, and New-Guinea. Even though the term was only coined in the late 1970s, I think we can retrospectively see these attempts in trying to acquire certain rights based on belonging to a particular group. And the rights that I'm talking about should be seen as emancipatory rights. Rights that would try and make those native tribes equal to usually those who took over their land. And by equal, I mean by law, at least. And make them equal to the rest of the population. Whether this effort turned out fruitful in those different cases is clear from the history books, but at least the attempt was made, and the premise on which it was grounded, the identity of the group, set the precedents for other groups to attempt something similar and perhaps more successful. So how do we see it happening now? Nowadays, identity politics is rife, so it's basically everywhere. Growing from the 70s to give marginalized groups a voice and preventing them from their particular interests being overlooked because they belong to a larger group has now found its way in mainstream politics and media. And identity politics has come from a place where the goal was to emancipate a group, in other words, get equal rights, to an overlapping system of beliefs that are attached to the multiplicity of groups that a person belongs to. And it's this deterministic character that leaves hardly any room for interpretation. Either you are white, black, Arabic, or whatnot. And this ensures that people cannot leave their categories and the institutionalized prejudice that comes with it. And I mean institutionalized, not so per se from a governmental perspective, which is obviously also true, that there is prejudice institutionalized coming forward from the governmental institutions, but also institutionalized as in its common practice outside of official organizations. And it's more common to view people belonging to a certain category in a certain way because of societal prejudice. The recent surge of the multiplication of different gender identities should not be taken as a rebellion against identity politics with its strict categorization. It should be seen as a confirmation or of a confirmation to it. Belonging to one of these subcategories does not allow you to escape the bigger, broader category, namely that of the queer, or whatever you want to call it. Your identity is not made more specific or unique the more you take on your gendered identity role. And if you put yourself into a category or a subcategory of a subcategory, you don't become more unique. The more you invest in expressing that specific role, the more you will be judged and branded by those very same characteristics. Much the same way, and sorry, I use a very extreme example, a white supremacist is judged by the fact that he or she is a white supremacist. And of course, you could argue against my last example and say that white supremacy is a heinous train of thought and is not an integral part of being white, and I would have to agree with you. Just because you are a certain way doesn't mean you have to pretend your identity in a certain way. You are more than your sexuality, your race, your class, and so on. In principle, I think everybody goes above their specific categories. At least I hope so. And if not, then you should strive to do so. Maybe that's easier said than done from my end. I don't know. Maybe I should check my privileges. But that's what I believe. So what's the danger in an increased emphasis on identity politics? The biggest danger that I see is division. The idea that you will better be able to fight for your rights, the more you marginalize yourself, is completely absurd. It's a shallow investment spurred on by your ego in a fight to be recognized as unique. But by doing so, you take away part of your uniqueness. You belong to an infinite set of categories and subcategories, and you shouldn't allow yourself to be driven into any one of them. We should strive towards our categories not determining us and who we are. We should rise above and see what connects us in a much, much broader sense if we want to overcome the challenges that the 21st century throws at us. And there are many. So what do I care? So I studied gender, and more specifically gender, bodies, and the post-human as a subject at university during my English literature bachelor. I am interested in the way that gender is constructed and negotiated on top of our biological sex. There is little leeway in the latter. You're either male or female, or in some occasions born with both or none of the reproductive organs. But there's a lot more fluidity in gender, and I think emerging technologies have at least some part in the increase of gender uncertainty that many young people experience nowadays. The way that we express our sexuality is increasingly becoming digitalized, and so is the way that we try to fulfill our desires. We're trying to find and build meaningful relationships with complete strangers, something that wasn't possible, let alone imaginable, when my parents were growing up. I am no exception. My current and past two relationships have come about through apps. Technology is always an extension of the things that we can already do, and it exacerbates certain abilities for better or for worse. With a bike, I can move myself faster than on foot, and with more advanced technology, such as a motorbike, I can move even faster. I can also die faster. Similarly, I have more outlets to express my gender and my specific niche identity, and in so doing, I become more of myself, right? Well, let's look at the initial motivation to express one's sexual identity. And I mean one's sexual identity as a gay, lesbian, or queer person. Basically, why does pride exist? It's because gay, lesbians, bisexual, and transgender people weren't equal in many ways to the rest of the population. They didn't enjoy the same rights and weren't allowed to express their sexual identity. I wanted to set that straight, pun intended. With the rise of social media, we have moved into digital spaces, which at least contain the premise that you can express yourself more clearly or more safely. You are able to add your pronouns to your LinkedIn profile. You're able to post a rainbow flag or find other ways to uniquely express yourself. This is all done, however, in a highly regulated place where the cameras are constantly on and where memory is eternal. To stick to the motorbike analogy, you are able to more quickly move through a global network, connecting to other people with, for instance, similar interests, but you are also more likely to crash and burn eternally in the purgatory of one of Facebook's data centers. Now, I don't fear that many people are going to get burned because they say the wrong thing, or will offend someone because they use the wrong pronoun or something like that. Because as people, we are very well able to pick up on very subtle signals and the expectations that are placed upon us. I think that's one of the things that we are very good at. Now, what I'm afraid of is that not enough people will do that. They will not test the rules and the restrictions and the regulations, the expectations. And in so doing, they don't realize that their speech is heavily regulated. And when your speech is heavily regulated, even if you do it yourself or someone else puts a very explicit rule of conduct upon you, then you're not really able to express your identity freely. What if part of my identity is offensive to you? That's exactly how the LGBT community was being shut down for years in the West, and still is in many other countries. Their very existence was perceived as offensive, so they were not allowed to express themselves. So, to conclude, throw off the shackles of a niche identity, because they can only help you in victimizing yourself. Of course, there's great power in that, but it's dishonest and comes with a due date. There's only so much you can achieve as a victim. If you look far enough, everybody belongs to a niche category that nobody else can be placed into. But rather than dividing ourselves up into ever-increasing categories, we should see what binds us together. Thank you very much.